My name is Nat Nunu Amatefio. I am the facilitator for this module on urbanization and sustainable development. We are treating contemporary issues affecting Africa. And I welcome you, the potential leaders of our continent, to this course. The objective of this session is to explore the consequences of urbanization on sustainable development in West Africa. Now, what is urbanization? Urbanization is the wholesale movement of people from one part of the country, usually the rural country areas, to another part, usually the urban centers. We will look at this urbanization and the difficulties it presents in West Africa. I must hasten to add that urbanization does not only present difficulties, it also presents us with tremendous opportunities to move ahead, to refresh the blood in our cities, to create new jobs and new opportunities. We shall examine this phenomenon through the impact it has on the most vulnerable members of the community. These I categorize as recent immigrants to the city, uneducated and unemployed young people, and working class women. Through these discussions, we'll look for some solutions to some of these problems. In West Africa, there are many reasons why urbanization occurs. For most of our history, the shift of populations has occurred because of warfare, or because of droughts, or flooding, or changes in the weather which makes farming impossible in one corner of the society. Currently, we are facing problems of urbanization because of changes in our economy. In the 1960s, soon after independence, we had a huge upswell of urbanization because many governments decided to invest in industrialization, rather than maintain their investment in farming in the rural areas. So a lot of farmers or young people left the farming belt to come into the city. And that was in the 1950s, 1960s, when many African countries started getting independence. Subsequent to that, we had migrations. The civil wars in Nigeria created a huge migrant wave. The subsequent economic problems in Ghana in the 1970s also created a huge wave of migration, both internal to Ghana and from Ghanaians going abroad, especially Nigeria, to seek greener pastures. The recent civil war in the Ivory Coast also created its own group of migrants, all responding to the need to seek shelter and safety somewhere else. So, right now we talk, there is a drought in South Africa, and I have no doubt that this drought will also produce another wave of migrants, adding to the problems of urbanization. Who are most affected by these migrations? In our society, urbanization, which is handmaiding of migration, brings the following. It brings female poverty. It brings youth poverty and unemployment. It leads to the proliferation of street children. It leads to the establishment of slums and also growing inequality in the society. Okay, now, the first topic we shall treat is to define and create an overview of the key concepts we shall be working with. Urbanization, as I mentioned earlier, is a process by which large numbers of people become permanently concentrated in cities. A country is considered to be urbanized when over 50% of its population live in the urban areas. And these are some pictures of overcrowding as an impact of urbanization. This is Makola Market in the heart of Accra, and each day over 1 million people pass through this particular area. There is overcrowding again, and this is Kumasi, Kejetia Market, which is the main market in Kumasi. Another example of gross urbanization. Urbanization leads to the creation of slums. Slums are created when people are packed into areas of the city and are deprived of municipal amenities such as clean water, electricity, health, and educational facilities. They lack police protection and live with a high level of insecurity. Slums generally have cheap and affordable lodgings and are attractive to poor people. Municipal authorities do not particularly like slums. They frown on slums. And because of their hands-off attitude to slums, they tend to exacerbate their negative conditions by withholding urban services from them. Slums suffer from insecurity, and because of the materials used in constructing their dwellings, there are frequent fires. There is a famous slum in Accra called Old Fadama. It is built on this behind an old timber market and sits beside one of the waterways that wash through the city. The dwellers in Old Fadama, in order to get more land to build their houses, take sawdust from the old timber market and use it to mix with the soil along the banks of the river to create earth firm enough to build their houses upon. Because of the flimsy materials that's used in construction, anytime there's a fire, the fire not only rages above their heads, around them, but also on the earth beneath their feet. This is an example of dwellings in a slum. Old Fadama, that I mentioned earlier, began in the 1990s. At that time, I was the mayor of the city of Accra. And the MP, Member of Parliament, for a constituency in northern Ghana, came to see me and requested permission to settle some of her constituents in Accra. At that time, there was civil war raging in the northern part of the country. It was a struggle over land rights, and people were getting killed, houses were being burned, and everybody was very frightened. So she came and saw me and said, look, Mr. Mayor, can you allow my people to come and settle in just a small portion of Old Fadama? I don't expect that this war will last more than 6 months. So we shall be here for 6 months, and after the 6 months, when the war is over, we shall go back home. Without really thinking too much of the implications, I agreed. And that is over 20 years ago. And they are still there. And from a small group of about 300 or 400 people who came seeking refuge, now Old Fadama is about 100,000 people. It shows you what happens when you have urbanization and the metropolitan authorities or the national authorities do not keep a close eye on it. I tell you this story because as young people who will be ruling this country and managing of our affairs, you must be very, very careful. The politics that you begin, you must be aware of where it can lead to. This is an example of Old Fadama. Actually, this is more a fire in our slum. Because people who live in slums have no permanent claim on the land. They are basically squatters. The city refuses to accept that they have a right to stay there. The city is afraid that by extending municipal facilities to them, it is implicitly recognizing their right to be there. So the city withholds all civic privileges to them. There is no building regulations, don't ascribe to them. They are not recognized. Building regulations are not recognized there. So they use any material that comes to hand, mostly wood and cardboard, and which are highly flammable. They illegally plug into electric poles and draw illicit electricity to their homes. And when they draw illicit electricity to their homes, eventually they overload the electrical systems, and that leads to fires. And what you are seeing here is an example. Another result of urbanization is female poverty. In West Africa, and I suppose in Africa generally, education is expensive, especially for rural people. Even in heavily subsidized national economies, children of the poor have a hard time getting to schools because their parents simply cannot afford to equip them with the facilities needed to go to school. So generally, the families educate their male children to the extent that the schools are there to provide education. Young females are basically left to be prepared for early marriage or to work for menial work. This guarantees poverty among rural families, rural females. So when they come to Accra, or they come to Kumasi, or they go to Lagos or Ibadan, the easiest work that the females can do is to act as maids or as porters. In Accra, we have a whole population of female carriers called Kayaye. Kayaye are female porters, generally between 12 and 35 years old, who act as carriers in the markets. Most of them are migrants from northern Ghana who came to Accra to earn money to marry and to support their families. They make money by carrying loads for people who have customers in the markets. In the city like Accra, and I suppose like many other West African cities, without very effective public transportation, these kaya are absolutely necessary if trading is to work within our cities. And yet they are the most menial and vulnerable of the people upon whom urbanization impacts in our cities. They are generally uneducated and possess very few marketable skills. They live as cheaply as they can in slum dwellings. Sometimes they sleep in kiosks or on unfinished buildings. In order to guarantee their security, they band together for protection. They are the most vulnerable of those who suffer from urbanization in our cities. The fact that male children are given education in the rural areas, preferably over female children, does not guarantee that they have a better future themselves. Many times, rural education is poor. The teachers are not well motivated. And the children really have a hard time making sense of the education that they get. Besides which, many of the young are attracted to the city, and they come here. What you see is a picture of a young man at Old Fadama. Old Fadama has a dubious distinction of being one of the biggest sites for cannibalizing computers and electronic equipment, for chemicals and for materials to be exported, sold and exported to other parts of the world. Apparently, it's very lucrative, and in a growing city, in a place where urbanization is continuously replenishing the young people who are willing to take the risk. It is a very dangerous program. It's a very dangerous employment, but there are always young people willing to do it. It exposes them to carcinogenic materials. They have a short lifespan because the smoke, they have to burn some of these equipment in order to release the material. And the smoke that they inhale ensures them an early demise. Street children is another casualty. In a society where most people live in slums, where parents don't particularly live with one another, where you have huge populations of Kayaye who are vulnerable to sexual predators, you also have lots of street children. When I was mayor, I became aware of the plight of street children because not too far from my home, between my house and my office, you have to go through an area which is full of markets. And I noticed that on the side of the street, every day, there were a dozen or two bands of children just playing on the sidewalk, and they were rather young, from maybe 1 year old to about 6 year old or 7 year old. And they were always minded by an older child. asked my driver, who are these children? And he told me that these are the children of the Kayaye, the market porters. They have nowhere to leave their children when they leave home to go to work. So what they generally do is get one of their own to stay at home and look after the children, and they take turns doing this. We try to do something about it with mixed results. The problem with street children is, what I found as mayor was that their parents were very suspicious of authorities. Their contact with authorities of any kind is not very optimistic. So, after I discovered these street children, we created a kindergarten to give them a place to stay during the day when their parents were at work. But we were not very successful because the mothers did not want to take their kids to any government-run kindergarten. The problem is that these children, by spending their formative years roaming the streets of Accra, tend to perpetuate the poverty of their parents and to replicate their social disadvantages. They are subject to sexual and criminal predators and also have the potential of becoming same themselves.